everyone, and welcome to this new series of discussions between Yaron Brook and European intellectuals on various topics. So today is the first discussion, and the topic is capitalism versus Marxism. But it's not one of the usual discussions where your usual Marxist is someone who hates progress or doesn't like human beings, and they would rather have humans extinct in favor of polar bears. So we bring one of the best Marxists that there are out there, someone who is in favor of progress and someone who is in favor of the vision of the Enlightenment, and we're going to see what the discussion brings up. So on the one side, we have Jaron Brook. So Yaron is the chairman of the board of the Ayn Rand Institute, and also he's the host of the Jaron Brook Show. He has written various books more relevant to this topic: Free Market Revolution with Don Watkins and Equal is Unfair, again with Don Watkins. And on the other side, we have Dr. Ashley Frawley. Ashley is a senior lecturer at Swansea University. She's a commentator. If you watch the newspaper review on Sky News, you have seen her. She's also been on BBC. And she has written a book called Semiotics of Happiness. And actually, this is a book that I think even objectivists will enjoy, because it's a criticism of this idea that says money doesn't make you happy. So what is the format of the discussion? The format of the discussion is each speaker has 10 minutes for some introductory remarks. Then there's going to be some inter-panel discussion. So I'm going to throw some questions for Ashley to reply to Yaron and vice versa. And then we are going to go to the questions of the audience. You can ask via super chat. Raz is going to collect the questions, and we're going to ask them probably on the second part of the discussion. We have 1 hour, so this is how it goes. Before we start, a big thank you, obviously, to the Ayn Rand Institute, which is sanctioning morally but also materially these discussions, and of course to the Ayn Rand Center UK for the initiative and for all the energy that Razi has put in it. So if you want to support, send a super chat, but even better, become a member, because there are so many perks that if I start mentioning them, I'm going to take time from the discussion. So let's begin. The frame of the discussion is, which is the system which is beneficial for human flourishing and progress? Is it capitalism? Or if capitalism at one point was the system that brought this progress, is now capitalism an obstacle that stands in the way? And if yes, is there any other system? Is there any other way to organize the economy or to organize society that can bring better results? We start with Yaron.
Thank Nikos. Thank you, Ozzy. Thank you guys for organizing this. And thank you, Ashley, for being willing to do this. I really appreciate it. I think the first question we need to ask ourselves is, what leads to progress? If we're taking as an assumption we all agree that progress is good, and let's assume we agree that we're talking about the same thing when we talk about progress. Maybe we'll dig into that later. But let's assume that human well-being, standard of living, quality of life, life extent of life, health, all of these things that involve human well-being are something we value and something we want to see in the world in which we live. Then the question is, where does that come from? Because clearly, forever, that wasn't the state of humanity. For hundreds of thousands of years, life was short, life was brutish, life was brutal. It was not pleasant. It was not materially successful or spiritually successful, with a few exceptions here and there in particular cities and particular eras. But overall, income did not rise. Life was pretty much, about 30 years of life for an individual. There wasn't much progress. So the question is, where does progress come from? And I would argue that progress is a product of the human mind. It is a consequence of innovation. It is a consequence of entrepreneurship. It is a concept of people taking scientific ideas and making them wield in the world. We saw that in the beginning of the Industrial Revolution, what Jaron Brook called the Great Enrichment. We saw that we've seen that over the last 250 years. In places where people could take their ideas, make them a reality, build businesses around them, create products, create goods. In those places, humanity flourished, at least from a material perspective, did phenomenally well. Now, what makes that possible? Well, I think what makes that possible are two fundamental ideas that come out of the Enlightenment. The two ideas that make the enormous success, material success that we've seen in the last 250 years, the progress we've seen, the two fundamental ideas that make this possible are, one, a recognition of the efficacy of human reason. That reason is our basic means of survival, but reason is our only way to know reality, and therefore to understand it, and therefore to conquer it, to shape it in order to make our lives better. And of course, the identification that reason is not some collective attribute. We cannot eat for one another. There's no such thing as a collective stomach. We cannot think for one another. There's no such thing as a collective brain. Each one of us must do our own thinking. Now, it is true that we benefit from one another. We build on past knowledge. We build on other people's knowledge. But the thinking must be done by the individual in order to progress. And indeed, the other idea that comes out of the Enlightenment that makes all this possible is the idea of individualism, the sanctity of the individual, the importance, the moral importance of the individual's life. As the Declaration of Independence, the American Declaration states, each individual has a moral right to pursue his happiness, right? His happiness. So the two areas are reason, ability to think, ability to understand the world, and the idea of living for oneself. These are the things that made progress and success possible. And their political manifestation is capitalism. Capitalism is the political manifestation of a human society based on reason and on individualism. The fundamental notion in capitalism is that individuals are free to think and therefore to act on the basis of their thoughts, to innovate and then create based on those innovations, to fail, to suffer the consequence of the failure, to learn from it, and to rise up and build again. The idea is that individuals are free of the one enemy that reason and individualism have. The enemy of reason is coercion, force, dogma, authority. Somebody telling you you have to think in a particular way. Somebody telling you you have to come to a certain conclusion. Somebody telling you you cannot do that. We don't allow it. We don't like it. Somebody regulating your actions and your thoughts. That's the enemy of reason, and ultimately the enemy of individualism and their pursuit of happiness. Somebody telling me what my values must be, and if they're not, is free, is able to coerce me not to pursue my values. That's the enemy. Capitalism is the system of individual rights. That is the recognition that as individuals, we're all free to pursue our rational values, and freedom in this context means free of coercion, free of authority, free of force. And indeed, every society that is practiced, that is allowed for this freedom, that is restrained coercion, restrained force, restrained authority, has done well. Not as well as I'd like it to be, because no society has ever done this perfectly. There've been a variety of degrees, but always to the degree that a society is free in this sense, to the degree that individuals are left free to use their mind, to pursue their own values, to pursue their own happiness, to pursue their own life, those societies, individuals tend to be successful. They tend to create material wealth, and they tend to create spiritual wealth. Now, what is the alternative? Well, there are a variety of different alternatives, and today we're debating one, Marxism. And I'm going to obviously simplify what Marx said because I've only got 4 minutes. But the core, in my view, of Marxism and almost all ideas that oppose capitalism is that they undermine both of those two principles that lead to human progress. They undermine the idea of reason, they undercut it, and they undermine and undercut the idea of individualism. Individuals, since reason is a faculty of the individual, these two are connected. It is not true that individuals know what's good for them. It is not true that the individual, in pursuit of his own self-interest, can attain happiness and attain success. It is not true that the individual should be allowed to pursue their own values. No, the individual is not framed by his own mind and his own choices. The individual is framed by the class into which he is born. He is framed by the environment around him. To some extent, by the genes that he has. He is either bourgeois and therefore, exploiting, or proletarian and therefore somebody who's being exploited and who has no say in that exploitation because he is what he is and he's already a proletarian and he can't change his fate and he can't change his outcome. He can't negotiate better terms. And therefore, he must rebel against the system that oppresses him. And the only way to rebel against the system that oppresses him is to deny the ability of those others, call them bourgeois, call them whatever you want, to pursue their own values, to pursue their own happiness. Indeed, the whole setup is a setup of different groups, different collectives that have divergent interests, that have conflicting interests, indeed, that ultimately have zero-sum interests. That the one success comes at other people's expense. And that the individual ultimately should be striving morally not to achieve their own success, their own happiness, their own flourishing. But that the individual's moral purpose is to serve his class. It's to serve a group defined by the various Marxist groups, defined by whatever that group happens to be. It's not to serve himself. And that his interaction with other people is an interaction of exploiter or exploited, not as a trader of value for value. The assumption is of, a growing pie, but a growing pie where some are, exploiting others in order to grow it. So I know I'll get some pushback on my description of Marxism. And in the end, just like I said, with capitalism, to the extent that it's practiced, to that extent, it's successful. If you look at Marxism, to the extent that it's practiced, to that extent, it's a failure. The more consistently it's practiced, the more devastating the outcome. Take the Soviet Union, Mao's China, and so on, or the Israeli kibbutz. And the less it's practiced, it's still a disaster, just on a smaller scale. So socialism in all its forms fail in any variety and to any extreme. Capitalism, the more it's practiced, the more it's successful. Finally, I want to say just this, and I know my time's up. What we have today is not capitalism. What we have today is a mixture of capitalism and socialism, a mixture of statism and capitalism, a mixture of markets and heavy government regulations and redistribution of wealth. The system we have today sucks. It's no good. It's terrible. It's committing suicide. It's not going to lead to the kind of progress and flourishing and success for people in the future. It has to be revamped. It has to be rethought. And the question is, do we move towards more freedom, i.e. towards more capitalism, or do we move towards less freedom, i.e. towards a Marxist, socialist vision of the world? Thank you.
Thank you very much, Yaron. So I've seen Ashley has been dying to Marx-plain why you have been wrong. So let's give her that chance. Ashley.
All right. So some caveats there. You said that I'm one of the best Marxists. I'm not. I'm perhaps one of the most willing. But I have to say that, yeah, I agreed with most of what you said there up until you started describing Marxism. It's not a Marxism that I recognize, but I do see that that's become what's, that's what people understand to be Marxism. So you say Marxism, everywhere it's being tried. What are we trying? What's there to try? What do you imagine Marx was saying? Did he have a blueprint for exactly how we're going to do things? Did he say, this is how things will be organized? This is what we must do. This is how, we will organize production, and this is how we will organize our relationships with each other. Well, to a certain extent, there is a little bit of meandering in some of his work, but it isn't really, like, people imagine that Marxism is this blueprint or this system that is supposed to, an alternative to capitalism. He spent precious little time offering an alternative to capitalism. Most of his life was spent trying to understand what capitalism is, because you can, and this is actually one of the criticisms of what existed at the time that Marx was writing, which was utopian socialism and other kinds of sort of romantic anti-capitalists and other elements of socialism and communism that didn't follow from Marxist bent. That was one of his criticisms. He said that they would sit there and try to develop this perfect social organization that most perfectly matched human nature. But it was a waste of time, because you can't just imagine, oh, wouldn't it be great if we could all ride unicorns? And wouldn't it be great if we could all have X, Y, Z? What is possible comes out of what exists now. You can't just create a magical world totally anew. You have to understand what is going on in the world at the moment, how the system is currently structured, where it is going, what opportunities it's opening up. That is what you need to understand. And that's why Marx spent most of his life trying to understand capitalism, because he was trying to understand this new world that was being created every day within capitalism. Marxism is descriptive. It is not prescriptive. By and large, it is an understanding of what capitalism is. And what most people find kind of counterintuitive about Marx is that in many places in his work, he's actually almost giddy about the possibilities of capitalism, the possibilities put forward by capitalism. In some places, he heaps praise on the bourgeoisie for accepting the task that history put into their hands by felling feudalism to the ground and creating capitalism, because capitalism creates a basis of wealth production hitherto unprecedented throughout human history, and it allows us to create a level of abundance with very little human labor. But of course, that's not its purpose. It doesn't create abundance in order to relieve us from human labor. It creates abundance through the medium of profit. So we don't reach our human needs directly. We do that through the medium of profit. And now, I think what people understand when they hear Marx talking about profit, or when I say these sorts of things, it's like, oh, so he thinks we shouldn't do that. Well, yes and no. That the profit as a driver of capitalist production, it's not that he's saying like, oh, well, we shouldn't have profit. Capitalism itself abolishes its own mode of producing profit. So this is what accounts for a lot of the the praise that Marx heaps on capitalism at the same time as the criticism, which is really confusing and difficult to grasp for a lot of people who maybe are coming to Marx's work for the first time. So, the most basic example, you can look at the Communist Manifesto, where he says, it has produced wonders that far surpass the Roman aqueducts and Gothic cathedrals. It has been the first to show what mankind can do. He celebrates capitalism and its productivity, but then he says, but at a certain point, the condition of bourgeois wealth creation starts to undermine the process or the ability to produce further wealth. It becomes a fetter on progress. And just as feudalism, once perfectly fine for meeting human needs, was burst asunder by a much more productive system, so too would capitalism eventually be burst asunder by a much more productive system. And so capitalism has this kind of forward push this incredible dynamism that's produced through competition. So through capitalists competing with each other, they compete to drive down the costs of producing things. And part of the way that they do that is by introducing machinery into the production process. And when they introduce machinery into the production process, they push human labor out, which is actually really good for human beings. Not so great when we're in capitalism, because when you lose your job, you lose your ability to support yourself. But for human, in the sort of grand sort of scheme of human progress, it's a wonderful thing that we've conjured forth these enormous means of production, basically like these matter machines that can produce fantastic commodities that our ancestors never could have dreamed of with so little human input. But at the same time, the measuring rod of value within capitalist society is human labor. And so by each individual capitalist raising their profit, they undermine the engine of profit. They undermine the source of profit, which is human labor. And so eventually what winds up happening is it becomes less and less, there's less and less incentive to invest, because in order to enter into production, let's say you want to compete with like Google or something like that, you have to, go into the production process and meet an enormous kind of capacity. Or if you want to compete with, like, let's say a car manufacturer, you're gonna have to buy like immense means of production in order to do that. But what you're interested in is a return on your investment. And it's going to take a really, really long time to recoup the cost, because over a long period of time of introducing machines into the production process, you wind up basically the cost of entering is enormous. And so what winds up happening is the avenues for productive investment get smaller and smaller. And why bother investing then? Why take the risk? Not only could you, let's say you buy some shoe factories and you want to compete with Nike, who's been in business for a really, really long time, has enormous means of production, enormous machines and so on. Why would you, buy all of that? And then at the end of the day, maybe never recoup the cost. Recouping the cost is going to take a really long time because the rate of profit's very low. But you may never do so because you may simply be, you may not be able to compete. You may not be able to just compete with what Nike is producing. So why take that risk? So it becomes logical then to try and find other avenues for investment that aren't productive. And so what we've seen over the last few decades is investment in enormous bubbles. Like, it makes sense. Why would I take the risk to produce something that's actually like good for human beings and human progress? I can just give loan money to students and they have to pay it back. It makes sense to do that. And this is one of the things that makes Marxism actually one of the more humanist approaches, because his understanding of crisis, his understanding of the ultimate undermining of the engine of progress within capitalism doesn't rely on human greed. It doesn't rely on human error. It doesn't rely on people being bad or mean and nasty. It starts with the exact same premises of bourgeois economists, the rational individual. And it's the system in its very proper functioning, even in an ideal sense of it functioning just the way that people say that it should, not people making mistakes, that's what leads to crisis. So at a certain point, what is a wonderful system that's very, very productive and produces the basis of a whole new world in which we can create with very little labor, actually turns around and starts to, the profit motive starts to weaken, and there's less and less incentive to invest. Okay, so I think I went into way more detail than I was expecting there. But in what other way can we think about, so Marxism is an attempt to understand capitalism and what capitalism is creating. That is a basis of wealth and abundance that could provide a future in which I no longer have to sell my freedom to somebody for 40 hours a week. So you mentioned, like, what is the enemy of freedom? It's coercion. It's not having the right, it's being told what your values should be. Hi, I sell that. I sell my values for 40 hours a week. And so do, many more people. And also more hours than that if they can get them. I can't think what I want. And increasingly, people are actually demanding that even outside of those 40 hours, I should embody the values of my employer. It's like creeping out everywhere. And so if you have a world of wealth and abundance that is produced with very little human labor, you can have what capitalists today have. We have a small portion of the population that are able to live the life that actually all human beings can live. We have that capacity. Capitalism has produced that capacity where they can work if they want to, but they don't have to. All human beings can live like that. We can all work if we want to, but we don't have to, because automation gets to a point where it takes such little labor. Now, within capitalism, that's quite bad. It's quite bad for workers because you get thrown out of work and so on. It's quite bad for the overall profit rate, but it is quite good for human progress. And that's why Marx is so excited about capitalism in some places in his work. But in what sense can we think about Marxism as a system? Well, it's a system that attempts to understand the movement of history. So it's historical. Marx tries to understand how feudalism, out of feudalism, emerged capitalism, and how some things that existed within that system kind of in many ways carry on into capitalism, but in an obscure form. So when you were a feudal serf, you worked some of the time for the feudal lord, and you worked some of the time for the capitalist, for yourself, for your family. You work some of that, so it's obvious. You grow your produce, you see it right in front of you, you cart it over to the feudal lord, it's gone. Within capitalism, that is obscured. So we have the wage relation. So you are paid the value of your labor. You are paid the value of your labor power, but the use value of your labor is that you produce more above and beyond what you are paid for. So this actually opened up an enormous realm of freedom for human beings, because when you were a serf, you died a serf. When you are born in capitalism, who knows what you can become? But that fundamental kind of exploitation still remains there. We are freer than we have ever been, but we are not fully free, because we still have to work a certain amount of time above and beyond what is necessary to replace our wages, to replace our means of our means of life, of whatever it takes to get us to come back into the production process the next day. But we also work a certain amount beyond that for someone else. I always say to my students, you work a little bit of time. And by the way, I also teach bourgeois economics. I don't do a one-sided thing. But when I'm teaching Marxism, I always say you work some of the time for yourself, not for yourself, but to replace your wages. And you work some of the time for the capitalist. You work some of the time so that Paris Hilton can go on a yacht. And we can have a situation in which we don't have to do that. And capitalism is creating it, and it's creating the forces of its own destruction. Not inevitably, of course. We can do all sorts of terrible things. We can move into it like neo-feudalism. We can have all sorts of dystopian futures, but there is one future of possibility that is created by capitalism. And how do we seize that? By having human rationality, the capacity for human reason, human freedom, and having a non-negotiable thirst for wealth that we deserve. And when people say, no, you can't have that, you say, no, I see it. Capitalism creates it every day, and I want it. I want it all. Greed is actually good.
Thank you very much, Ashley. So hopefully by now the differences in the panel are clear. So we're going to proceed in the Q&A. Just a reminder to our audience, you can ask questions via Super Chat. For the Super Chat to go through the filter of Razi, it has to be polite and it has to be a question which is respectful to our audience. Again, it takes guts to come and play an away game and stand up against Yaron. So we have to be polite and we have to be kind. So also another reminder, from next Monday, ARC UK is bringing more stuff. So we have next week the premiere of HBTV, which is the Harry Binswanger TV. So philosopher Harry Binswanger, who at the moment has the Harry Binswanger letter, now he's also going to have a TV, let's say, program in ARC UK. So another reason again to support ARC UK. And also just to tell people that Next week, the discussion of Yaron is going to be with Zubi. You probably know Zubi from Twitter. And the topic is tradition, good or bad? So let's go to the first question. I also have a lot of questions here, but I'm going to give priority to super chats because we are happy to sell our labor to the super chatters, as someone said. So, super chat from Mario Lin. Are we, so the question, if I understand, goes to Ashley, but I also want to take Yaron's take. Are we not free because we have to work? So, and I add my caveat. Does the fact that, Ashley, you said we have to sell our labor, does this take away our freedom? And then what is the definition of freedom for you? Let's start with Ashley and then we go to Yaron. Or shall we start with Yaron till Ashley takes notes?
Oh, I can go ahead. It's up to you.
Okay, let's start with Ashley then.
We're not free because we have to work, because we have to sell our labor power, our ability to work to someone. So you can be, above and beyond feudalism, you can be way more. Like under feudalism, you were born a serf, you died a serf. Under capitalism, you can be whatever you want so long as you can convince a capitalist to pay you to be that thing. But in a world where you have, let's say, full automation, where, you're like, Comrade Alexa, I'd like my, meals delivered at 6 p.m., then you can do whatever you want. And actually, capitalism is creating this all the time, because as the labor that goes into making something goes down and down, further and further down, the separation between yourself and your product starts to disappear. So you can make music now on a laptop really, really easily, and almost anybody can do it. And of course, the value of that is quite low, but people do it anyway because they really love to do that. And that's that kind of freedom that gets produced within capitalism that also doesn't work within the logic of capitalism.
So Yaron, what is freedom? Why is it not, or is it impaired by you having to sell your labor? And also, does the fact that you can create stuff for free in your laptop and put it out there for free or sell it for free, does this undermine does this undermine the essence of capitalism?
Well, it doesn't undermine the essence of capitalism. It comes out of the essence of capitalism.
Okay, it comes out of the essence of capitalism. Okay.
So, where do you start? It surprises me constantly the extent to which people buy into the utopian notion of the Garden of Eden. This is an incredibly powerful story that has become part of the psyche. That is, there's some kind of ideal out there where manna just fall from heaven. You don't have to do anything. You can do whatever you feel like doing. To hell with human reason. Who needs that? That's the tree of knowledge. You don't want to eat out of that. You just consume. You're just a consuming machine. That's not human life. That's not flourishing. That's not happiness. That's not success. That's not anything. Labor is not torture. Labor is how we change the world to fit our needs. We are a being in a particular environment. If we just plop there and rely on our emotions like they do in the Garden of Eden, we will die. That's reality. And therefore, we are in a position to change the world to fit our needs, to make things better. And we work to do that. Feudalism was an awful way to do that because it was zero sum and there was no progress, and human beings got stuck, as was every system before capitalism. So it's not a progression of systems. It's systems that didn't work forever, for 100,000, 200,000 years. And then we hit on something that actually works. The only thing that's ever worked for human beings, and that is capitalism, the successful creation. Now, so there's this fixation of machines will just feed it to me. Who created the machines? Who built them? Now, again, Marx is completely wrong. Laborers don't create almost anything. Labor is simple. Labor is interchangeable. Labor has very little value. That's a reality. Where do machines come from? Machines come from a few particular individuals that have the imagination, the gall, the guts, the energy, the passion to organize capital and labor in order to make their reality real. In all of the history of the last 250 years, there are very few cases where a bunch of laborers arrived in a particular place and said, okay, let's build something, and built it. I mean, maybe you can find one example here and there in some commune in Spain or something, but it doesn't happen. The fact is that progress, innovation, ingenuity, technology, everything involves an individual's mind. Now, Marxists say, to hell with that. That's not of any value. The people who really create the value are those workers down there. No, those workers are basically doing what somebody had the audacity to imagine could be done. That person is not exploiting them. You could argue that they're exploiting him. I won't argue that because I don't believe that. But to the extent that anybody's getting the short part of the stick, you know, somebody like, I was going to use Bill Gates, but Bill Gates is not a good name to use these days, given that his troubles. But, you know, somebody like Steve Jobs or Bill Gates created trillions of dollars of wealth in the world, created as individuals because of their ideas, because of their ability to organize, quote, labor, programmers, managers, laborers to build the machine, supply chains. They created trillions and trillions and trillions of value in the world. Some of that value was captured by labor. They got paid for everything that they produced. They got paid based on the amount that they added to the final product. Bill Gates, I don't know, got paid in a sense, $100 billion. But he created trillions. I mean, he's way underpaid in comparison to the workers. Any one of those workers could have been replaced. Find another Bill Gates, find another Steve Jobs, find another Larry Ellison. That's what's interesting. That's what's unique. And the whole, you know, hopefully there'll be a question about investment, because the whole view of investment is wrong and is not reflective of reality at all.
So can I ask the panelists, we have such a good series of super chats. So instead of dialogue, let's try to give answer only to the super chats because they're really, really good. So second super chat comes from Bonnie. And the question is, what in essential terms was Marxist view of human nature? And to put this question into some context, so Yaron mentioned that capitalism is the system that is in a way in accordance to human nature, that we need reason and freedom in order to survive. And if I've understood well from discussions that I've had with Ashley in the past, we've had this disagreement on whether there is such a thing as human nature and whether you can build a system based on human nature. So, Ashley, can you tell us what is Marx's view of human nature and how do you view the topic and whether we can build a political system based on human nature? Excellent question, Bonnie, by the way. Thank you.
Okay, so Marx's view of human nature is its ability to create its own nature. So he writes, it is the everlasting nature-imposed condition that man must work on the world. And in so doing, we work on ourselves. We have different ideas because we create different things in the world. We are the only animals that create the conditions of our own life, and in so doing revolutionize the societies in which we live. And that makes us different from animals. So that means that you can't, that's one of the reasons why you can't put forward a kind of blueprint for society, what it's going to be, and this kind of essential human nature and all these human requirements and so on. Because by creating things in the world, different ways of doing things, we create different ways of flourishing. What I need now to survive is fundamentally different than what people needed 1,000 years ago, 5,000 years ago, 10,000 years ago. The ideas that I have in my head are fundamentally different because we have different ways of doing things. So I mentioned feudalism, for example. So under feudalism, you had a fundamentally different idea of human nature. People thought, you know, it is in the nature of the serf to be a serf. It is in the nature of the king to be a king. It's in the nature of the slave to be a slave. They thought that people were just born like that because there was such a rigid kind of concentration of wealth within this class structure. It didn't really change. And that's how it was, you know, it really did appear as though people were born at serf, and that was like inside of them, that was their essence. But then capitalism came and that blew the whole thing open. And suddenly someone could be born a peasant and wind up in New York, you know, as a baron, or not so bad word to use, but, you know, a capitalist. something fundamentally different. And so then we have fundamentally different ideas in our heads about human nature. That we start to have this idea of like fundamental qualities of human beings, that we have a basis of, well, what is it that makes us all human then? What is the essence of human beings? That question starts to pop up and we say, well, it is the essence of human beings to have reason. And then we have science that comes out of that and so on, that, you know, I have a mind and you have a mind and I can show you the same thing and you're going to see it and you're going to come to the same conclusion as I do. And all of these things come because we revolutionize the way that we do things. And so you can't say, oh, in order to have human flourishing, we need this, 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 and develop this kind of list of things. And now let's create this society which hits all of these things. No, you see what's happening in the world and it is changing. It is changing. And we can say, well, there are some things about these changes that I want to hold on to. And there are some things that I want to push back against. So there is this enormous pull backward. So we have a problem. Let's say we have a crisis, an economic crisis. And there's this backward pull. You know, this crisis warns us that there's something going on here, that this system is inherently crisis bound. And there are people who want to say, okay, that's fine. Let's default to the negative side of that, the regressive side. Who needs economic growth? Money doesn't make you happy. And then there's the progressive side of that, which says, well, hold on a second. How can we have a crisis? Why can't I eat? When the crisis is that we've produced too much, and not too much for human need, but too much for some asshole to make a profit from. So then that reveals to you that this system is not an absolute system for the creation of wealth, but has come into conflict with the further production of that wealth. And then we hold on to that. We say, I want to have that progressive side. How can we maintain the progressive force of capitalism, these enormous means of production? And how can we turn them to human ends, to human needs directly rather than indirectly, which creates these problems that we have, you know, crisis and the backward motion and so on.
Just to make sure we don't switch the discussion to the issue of crisis of capitalism, because I know both of you have, that could be a different episode. So Yaron, issue of human nature. So basically Ashley says that in a way, is it that you're a bit like a central planner, that you say the best society needs to have this and this and this and this?
I didn't understand the way you phrased the question. So, but I'll say this, human nature is, I mean, Ashley hit on it in the middle there. That is that it's human beings have reason. Human beings are the rational animal. Aristotle hit on this a long time ago. If we paid attention to him 2,500 years ago, we wouldn't have had a dark ages. It's a negation of that idea. It's a negation of reason that leads us to dark ages and to dark means. And yes, I'm all for, we have different ideas, we have different things. So yes, leave people free to do it. And you know what, if Ashley comes up with the idea that, you know, to each according to his needs, from each according to his ability, then great, go found a commune and do that. That's the beauty of capitalism. The beauty of capitalism is you can start a workers owned co-op. You can start any kind of structure you want, free of intervention, free of coercion. You can't do that the flip side, right? Any kind of politicization of Marxism involves somebody telling me what I can and cannot do. Somebody telling me what kind of relationship I can have with Nikos and what kind of relationship I can't. He's not allowed to be my employee, even if he wants to. Capitalism is something that when you protect people from coercion, authority, you leave them free to use their mind, to pursue their own values, emerges from the choices people make. It isn't shaped and constructed and put together. All we do from the top is protect people's freedom and then let whatever emerges. And if it turns out that what emerges, I mean, this would be shocking, but if it turns out what emerges is from each according to his ability to each according to his means, so be it. But I'm willing to put down everything I own as a guarantee that would not happen.
So would I, though. So would I. So that's the thing, is that what Marx is saying is with that line is that he's actually criticizing another socialist group at the time who had put forward that as a slogan, as a demand. He says you can't just put that forward as a demand. You have to have a certain amount of development before you can ever get to that point.
I'm saying
and it will never just happen. It will never just happen, and unless we dogmatically hold on to certain values that are indeed produced within capitalism against the forces of capitalism itself.
People, let's not interrupt each other because there are So the next super chat is as if we ordered it. It's exactly on this. It's exactly on this point, and it's directed to Ashley. So the question is, what's stopping Marxists from starting their own town/societies and carrying out their ideology? Why does it appear that they need to parasitize a functioning yet imperfect capitalist society? Ashley.
Sorry, what was the end of that question? Why do we have to parasitize?
So basically the thing is, why do you have to expect from the capitalists to build the means of production to take them, and why don't you build your own society somewhere else?
Well, we tried that, and it was, a constantly at war, and constantly under destruction. One of the problems that faced the USSR was that you can't just have like a little commune where everybody lives like Smurfs. That's not the idea. That's not the goal. Nobody wants to go back to any kind of past where we imagine that our relationships with each other were fully developed. What we want to do is create a situation where what capitalism has created by alienating human beings from the products of their labor, by separating human beings. So in the past, let's say in the Smurfs, you created something and you consumed it directly. Capitalism separates you from the product of your labor. You don't consume it directly. You make a product, you have no claim to that product. It goes to the capitalist, you get wages, and you buy your means of subsistence somewhere else. And so you're separated from the product. But that split allows them to come back together in a higher form through development of technology and so on. So as I mentioned before, you were split from, making music or whatever, and maybe that's a bad example, and then it comes back together in a higher form where you can think it and you can create it in a much more technologically advanced way that was possible before. So it's a whole movement of the entirety of the society. That's what we are trying to understand. What happened with the USSR was they recognized that they had to have a revolution in many, many different countries. You can't have just like a tiny little commune where you all live like Smurfs and live in your own imaginations. It's basically suicide. There had to be some kind of global movement, or else you would never be able to move beyond capitalism. You would have to trade with outside countries. Those countries would still be capitalist. Therefore, you would maintain the money form. And so all of the contradictions of capitalism would be maintained. And so there isn't some wonderful utopia that I have dreamed up in my mind, or that Marx dreamed up in his mind, that could just be put into place in some little village. It is about the whole movement of society and about trying to take control of that movement and try to direct it toward human ends directly, because right now it is indirectly. We don't produce directly for human need. We produce for profit and meet human needs in that way. But if there are needs in the world that can't be met profitably, then those needs will go unmet. If there are problems in the world that we can't deal with profitably, like climate change, for example, then we can't deal with that issue. And the idea is that we have the ability to do all of these things. We have the ability to deal with all sorts of problems, but because we deal with problems indirectly, we can't deal with them. And so the idea is it's trying to understand the whole movement of history and trying to direct it consciously to human ends. It's not an idea of us all living harmoniously with each other. And one thing that I wanted to mention too is that it's also about the freedom of the individual. It's not about living for each other. Right now, I live for other people. That's what I do. I am part of a production process that is very much entwined with other people. I spend whatever it is I mentioned before, 40 hours a week or more, if they can get me to live for someone else's needs, someone else's things that they dreamt up. I want to live for myself, and not having to be involved in wage labor. Eventually, the abolition of wage labor, which seems to be the natural process of capitalism, by removing human beings from the production process, will eventually free us to do that. So it's about the whole movement of history and to free the individual, as Oscar Wilde said, from that horrible necessity of having to live for other people.
Yaron.
I mean, this is magic thinking. I mean, this is the negation of reality and negation of reason. Technology just happens. It just appears there. Machines are going to produce all our goods. They're just there, and I'm going to be able to do whatever the hell I want. It doesn't just appear there. It comes about as a process of capitalist competition. In order to get any of this, you're going to have to create values. You're going to have to create values for other people. And there are going to be all kinds of ways in which you do that. All kinds of voluntary associations that you're going to create with other people in order to produce values on different scales. And different people produce different sizes of values. different quantity of values, different importance of values, different, both spiritually and materially. This is going to be different. Therefore, people are going to be different. They're going to be able to afford different things. It's not, and this idea that all our needs are going to be produced automatically is absurd, because all our needs have to be produced by somebody. Yes, we can build a machine for need one, but need one only creates 500 other needs that then we have to build machines to create them. Somebody has to build those machines. Somebody has to have the idea of how to build those machines. Somebody has to write the music. In order for you to make a living off of that music, somebody has to buy that music. It has to be of value to somebody. That's all capitalism. None of that is Marxism. All of that depends on private property. Marx explicitly says that communism is the abolition of private property. He's for the abolition of private property, and property
because capitalism abolishes it itself.
But it doesn't. That's all complete nonsense. That's not what capitalism is, and it's not how capitalism has evolved, and it's not what we're seeing.
It has. Okay, so where does automation come from? I'm just curious. Where does automation come from in all of this? What's the driver of automation?
The driver of automation is profit, but automation doesn't destroy jobs. That's bizarre. There are more jobs on planet Earth today than in any point in human history. And yet there's more automation today on planet Earth than ever before. And I will, again, bet anything that in 50 years, with all the robots and everything else, there will be more jobs. There'll be more work in 50 years than there is today, in spite of all the robots. So automation only creates more opportunities to create and to build and to make in a variety of collaborative efforts. And I consider corporation and a business of wage labor a collaborative cooperative effort. That's only expanding. It's not going to go away. Machines are never going to produce the things that you need. Human beings are always going to have to add something to make those machines happen. They're going to have to fix the machines, program the machines, and everything else. That's, quote, labor of the mind, not labor. So what we're eradicating is physical labor. That's a beautiful thing. Absolutely. And we're starting to eradicate certain types of mental labor. But that only frees us up to do other kinds of labor. We're always going to be working. Yes. We're always going to do something productive, but only within the context of capitalism. Again, capitalism is a system that says that you do what you want to do, and it leaves you alone to do whatever you want to do. If you want to go back and be a subsistence farmer, get a plot of land, and you can connect with the products that you sow, you can eat. You can do that under capitalism, right? Nobody stops you. You're not wage slavery, because you can stop being a wage. You can start your own business. You can go and be a farmer. You can do a million different things with your life.
How would I buy the land to be a farmer, though?
Well, you can. I mean, capitalism has provided you even with that. You can get a mortgage. I mean, capitalism. And by the way, all those laborers who are today laborers used to be farmers. Labor never existed until capitalism. Capitalism created labor. It created, and it's entrepreneurs who created labor. There's no labor without entrepreneurs. But I just
labor in relation to the capitalists.
Wait, sorry, people. We have three more.
I have to say this. I think it's wrong to whitewash the USSR, and pretend that it was somehow engaged. The problem was war. Yes, Marxism.
I'm not whitewashing the USSR. I was just mentioning that. I was just mentioning that it was doomed. It was
it has to be
doomed by the fact that it could not.
You have to oppress everybody, because in a small group, a suicide, then they look outside and they see people doing better than them. You have to make everybody miserable in order for people to accept their misery within communism. That is the reality. So yes, it has to be international, because it can't be localized, because it's a failure, local or no matter the size. It's going to be a failure.
Can I just clarify one point? It's not that people aren't going to have jobs. It's that the rate of return on investment gets lower over time. And we see that. We're seeing it does. There's tons of evidence of that.
There's no evidence. I'm a finance professor. Believe me, there's no evidence of that. I mean, if you'd invested in Amazon, you wouldn't say that the rate of return on investment is low. Indeed, if there is a rate of investment that's low right now, it's because of a lack of capitalism. That is the reason the return. I mean, it's obvious.
Why is there a lack of capitalism? Why is there this desire to? Why is there desire to move away?
Sorry, people. If you talk together, people cannot listen to you. Sorry, if you talk.
Moving away from capitalism, there's a desire away from capitalism, because Marx, like Christianity before it, rejects the fundamental assumptions that make capitalism possible. That is, there's a rejection in our society of reason and individualism. There's this idea that we can centrally plan an economy. That is so there's no crisis of capitalism of overproduction. It's never happened. No economist actually thinks that. That is bizarre. And there's actually and there is no problem of low return on investment. The problem is that there are not enough of ideas. And the reason there are not enough ideas, because if I have an idea today, I have to get permission to start a company. So I have to get permission to apply the idea. So whole realms of human innovation have been segmented off because of statism, because the state has become the regulator of human ingenuity and human ideas and human innovation. So more capitalism.
Wait. Sorry, why would
people.
They do that?
Wait, sorry, people. We have 3 more super chats.
Because they want power. I mean,
Yaron, 1 minute.
Exactly. See, you have to fall back on something about human beings. You see, so it winds up being
human beings have bad ideas.
Exactly,
which leads them to make bad choices, which leads them away
so you
from
throw
capitalism.
out the human subject. You don't actually believe that people are capable of freedom because they.
I believe in people are capable of freedom, but I believe they need to be.
That's the only way you can explain why things happen. It's always by bad people.
Sorry, people. Wait. People
have to,
Sorry.
Go ahead. You want a deterministic history, which is what Marx is. I don't believe in determinism.
It's not determinism. There are many different ways that things could go. I didn't say definitely going this direction.
The evolution of history. I mean, Marx didn't believe that.
I didn't say that we're definitely going to socialism. I actually said that there are many different paths that could actually happen if we.
Sorry. I have to interrupt. Sorry. We have 3 more super chats and 3 minutes. So we're going to do it battle of ideas style. I'm going to throw all 3 questions and you pick whichever you want. Okay. So let's respect our super chatters and put their questions out there. So question number 1, if my life no longer benefits others, asked Fabian, is it still okay? So basically, if I understand it, this means, is it okay to live for yourself or does this go against something that Ashley said? Second question, if there were no employer/capitalists, what do you think people would be doing to survive? Farming, hunting, or hunting-gathering? To what era do you want civilization to go back to? Next question, is it possible that people find meaning and purpose in being productive at their work? Is it possible that people find meaning and purpose in being productive at their work? Someone agrees with Yaron that automation will create more jobs. Okay, sorry, 2 more super chats. Okay.
The point about automation wasn't about jobs. It's about lowering the profit rate.
Okay, one second, sorry. Someone says, thanks to both Yaron and Ashley for this. I haven't got a question. Thank you so much. And the last super chat, Ashley, do you enjoy your work or do you only work as an onerous duty to help others? Okay, I've thrown a lot on the table. I would really appreciate if, as a respect to our super chatters, we deal with all these questions in the very few minutes that we have left. So try to be quick and let's start with Ashley since most questions were addressed at here. Pick whichever you want, but try to cover them all.
Okay, is it okay to live for yourself? Yes, that's the goal. And to remove the barriers from being able to do that to hold on to the progressive kind of potential for freedom that's made possible within capitalism by creating wealth and so on. But that's not the purpose of wealth within capitalism. It's just a byproduct. But the goal would be, yes, to live for ourselves, to remove us from having to live for other people, which is what we do now. If there were no capitalists, what would we be doing? We'd be trying to eliminate human labor from the production process directly. We would keep the entire product of our labor. We would be working toward a situation which is what capitalists experience right now. They can work if they want to, but they don't have to. That would be how everyone would live. You could work if you want to, but you don't have to. So you can spend, a certain part of your day being a machine tender and think up new kinds of machines. And people do this all the time now, as they get, there isn't any incentive. There didn't used to be any incentive to become a YouTube star. People just did it because they liked it. And now they do it to become stars. But I mean, there's nothing wrong with wanting remuneration. I'm just saying that, you could work if you want to, but you don't have to. You can sit on your ass if you want. You could be whatever. People find meaning and purpose in work. Yes, lots of people do. And we tend to admire those people. I think that's probably why we love footballers and musicians, because they get to do something that is fully creative and they really enjoy it. Some of them wind up being like human trafficked and that kind of thing. But we tend to admire them because at least we imagine that they are doing something that they love, whereas most people are not really able to do that. I think if there was no coercion, there was no, you weren't pursued by the threat of starvation. We now have welfare states and so on that take some of the surplus value and give it to people. So you don't necessarily, doesn't mean you starve, but generally you have to work. And most people, if you didn't have that coercion, you'd be doing something pretty different with your life.
I would very tempted to ask what's the definition of coercion, but
okay.
If I don't work, I'm gonna die. Yes, we have the welfare state. That can't be coercion.
That's the natural state of man. If they don't work, you die. That's the natural state.
No, because I can't even go outside.
If you look at point in time.
Look at, for example, the grapes of wrath. These people, when they got thrown off their land, they kept looking at the land saying, look, there are orange trees over there. Why can't I just eat the oranges? And they were like, because
somebody planted those. Somebody put in labor into those orange plants, and they're not yours.
No, they did that.
Let me finish.
They planted those oranges. They planted all of that stuff. It was taken by the banks, and they were pushed off the land.
Wait. If you consume the oranges, then no oranges next time.
And then the worst part is they even killed the pork. They even killed the pigs because they can't be sold.
There are no oranges anymore. I mean, it's such magical thinking and where production comes from and how production happens and where machines come from and where oranges come from. It really is.
They're products of human labor. We agree on that.
Marx was delusional 150 years ago. But really, I mean, when you think about the need for the human mind to produce these things, to plan, to think, to innovate, and then to ascertain that, yes, there's surplus value. There's no surplus value. The value goes to those who actually contribute to the production. But let me be clear something. Marx would have found it bizarre, the idea that human beings should live for themselves. And if you don't believe me, read a powerful essay that he wrote, my favorite piece that Marx wrote. It's on the Jewish question, where he lambasted the Jews for what? For living for themselves, for pursuing their own well-being, for pursuing their own monetary well-being, which he considered evil and horrific. And his accusation against the Christians was they were becoming Jewish because they were becoming too much in pursuit of their own well-being. So no, there's nothing in Marx other than his ultimate utopia where everybody lives for themselves because everything is available labor-free. There's nothing in Marx that suggests that you should live for yourself. Indeed, he recognized the fact that that in the transition to this ultimate utopia, many people would have to be killed. Many people would have to be eliminated. Read his letters with Engels, where they talk about different people and different classes and what needs to happen to those classes.
In those letters, that's literally the only thing that people like you read. He says those people are going to kill each other.
The transition to.
And so liberals said the exact same thing about Nazis and communists, that they're just going to kill each other and we should step back. Not a nice position to have, but that's something.
It was the inevitability of history was going to be that in order to achieve the utopia, certain people had to die, because he literally says
that these two warring groups were going to kill each other off, and then he says good riddance.
Yeah, I mean, okay.
Yeah. Oh, and then I don't know.
But he says more than that, and there's more than one letter.
Oh, good riddance.
But look,
literally the only thing.
Disassociate violence from Marxism is wrong. Marxism necessitates violence because it doesn't recognize the rights of the individual to live free based on his own values, based on his own choices. It forces the individual to live under a certain context. The abolition of private property is about abolition, not the phasing out of private property. The abolition, which means the taking away of private property, the taking away of people's hard work, of taking away the people's innovations, of the creation of people's minds. It necessitates violence. Marxism necessitates coercion and violence. And the idea that it is coercive, that coercion involves, I have to work, is ridiculous, because the state of nature in which man lives is that he has to work in order to survive.
Yes, he has to work in order to survive, but he has to, within a particular context, the ability to work directly, the ability to work directly for yourself was taken away historically. And so
nobody took it away. There are plenty of people who subsistence farm around the world.
Through the process of primitive accumulation.
Plenty of people.
I'm sorry, have you never heard of like indigenous people around the world? Like your ability to live off of the land was taken away. Literally, people were taken off that land, shipped to another place,
left the land because there was so much. 99% of people left the land because there was so much more opportunity elsewhere. But because capitalism created opportunities for people to live a much better life than the really awful life of indigenous people.
So the people, for instance, who were caribou hunters, taken and said, "Oh, now you're fishermen."
Sorry, we have more super chats.
Oh, you know what that would be?
Really, I mean, all people were indigenous people once, and people have chosen to give up the poverty of subsistence living in order to advance, in order to
that's like
live
you're
a better
just
life.
making things up. Like that's just literally not what happened.
Okay.
Anyway, by the way, I don't think there's any disagreement that Yaron would not approve of people being kicked off their land with violence or someone taking their land. So I think this disagreement is not very substantial. So, okay, 2 more super chats. Actually, 3 more super chats, and then we're done.
We had an hour. We can't go indefinitely, guys.
Okay, 3 more minutes. Okay, we finish at 10 past, solid end at 10 past, and please don't interrupt each other. So, the state blocks ingenuity, says Gail. So we have not seen the amazing results we would if government got out of the way. Super chat from Gullwings. Ashley, for the people that will be sitting on there, who will feed them? Will others be forced to provide for them? And the emphasis here is on the forced to provide for them. And last super chat. Marx also mocked Max Stirner for his, quote, egoism. Let me comment here. Max Stirner's egoism is to be mocked. So he's really bad. Don't confuse Stirner's egoism with Rand's egoism. Okay, so basically there's one question there. What if the people who sit on their couches, does someone have to be forced to feed them? And what if they don't want to feed them?
No, so the idea is that will never happen until the productive forces are developed and advanced enough. It's not like you'd be like, okay, now we're at a point where everyone just sits on their asses. And by the way, there are loads of people in the world who sit on their asses right now. They can work if they want to, but they don't have to. And lots of people don't. And who feeds them? I do when I work. I work a certain amount of time for myself and a certain amount of time above and beyond what I'm paid in wages. If that weren't the case, if I cost more than I make for the employer, I would be fired. So that's what I do. I already work for people who don't work. They can work, but they don't have to. And so that would never happen until we get to a point where the productive level, and I'm sure that we're at that point right now, if we had sorted out some way of organizing production without the law of value. And we have never sorted that out. We do not have an alternative. There is no alternative to capitalism. I will agree with that. We have everything that we tried. Every time we tried to overcome capitalism, we failed. But that's the thing, is that Marxism isn't like, oh, well, let's just go do this other thing, that it's an alternative. I think this is why people are sometimes very confused by me. I can sing the praises of capitalism, because I don't think that I need to tell people capitalism is this terrible system in order to overcome it. What terrifies me is that capitalism is going through an extraordinarily destructive phase. It is destroying the basis of its own wealth creation, and there is nothing to replace it. To restore the profit rate, we can do all sorts of things. We have a very destructive crisis right now. People go out of business, and you can buy them up, cheaply and so on. But you can also have war. You can flatten 2 continents and build them again. That restores the profit rate. That's what scares me, that there is nothing to replace it.
Okay, thank you, Ashley. So last word to Yaron. We went over time. This shouldn't happen again, but the discussion was too interesting. Yaron, your final words.
I'll just say, a big disagreement here is the labor theory of value. I think workers get as much, if not more, than what they should get, and certainly they get as much as what the alternatives provide for them. I think that business owners, middle managers, all the people that Marx likes to condemn, as properly paid, at least in a capitalist society. Granted, we don't live in one right now, but generally entrepreneurs are underpaid, not overpaid, if anything. The idea that Steve Jobs made too much money or Bill Gates made too much money is absurd, given how much they contributed to labor, because they created labor. There is no labor without them. Yes, I agree with this with Ashley. I too am worried where we're heading. We're heading towards some kind of feudalism, state-controlled, so-called state-controlled capitalism, which is not capitalism, but another form of socialism, whether it's fascism or socialism, or how you want to define it, or feudalism, how do you want to define it? We're heading in that direction. There's no question. And we're heading in that direction because of people not understanding what capitalism is and the virtue and beauty of it. And because capitalism is constantly being undermined in our political system. And I think the reason for that is because we, the capitalists, have not done a good enough job defending it and explaining it. And that the anti-reason, anti-individualism, anti-egoism philosophies out there are so deeply rooted in our society that it's hard to unroot them. But that is our job. Our job is to unroot those and get rid of those ideas so that we could have capitalism. And capitalism doesn't get replaced. It is the system that exists forever and under which we all flourish and under which we all achieve some kind of utopian or perfect existence one day.
Okay, let me wait.
They're trying to explain. Can I just agree with Ayn Rand on something? That people are actually observing something real happening in the world. They didn't just conjure up these ideas out of nowhere and be like, oh, geez, why don't we go back? Why don't we? They're seeing something happening in the world and they're trying to explain it. And they're trying to explain it in a context where there is no alternative. We can't go forward. Let's go back. I agree with you. They are the enemy. But these ideas don't just come out of nowhere. They exist in a context. People are actually trying to explain something in the world. However,
I agree with you. There are lots of problems in the world today and people are trying to explain them, but that doesn't make the explanations correct. Most of the explanation, 90% of the explanation are wrong, are corrupted, and they're corrupted by very, very fundamental ideas that are part of.
What are they trying to explain? They're trying to explain the progressive stagnation of capitalism, the fact that
they're trying to explain the fact that statism,
that growth just doesn't seem to be happening, that the historical rate of profit is tending towards zero. Okay.
Sorry, people, you are talking over each other, so let me finish on a positive note. So I'm very thankful overall in my life to both Ashley and Yaron, because for people who know me, know that me hanging out with Ashley many years ago was the turning point from me being a boring misanthropist, new leftist. So that was the starting of my journey. And then that journey, when I came across Yaron, led me where I am today. So
don't blame me for that.
Oh, your fault, Ashley.
So I'm very proud. I'm very happy with today's discussion. I hope the people enjoyed it. So many thanks for the super chatters. Thanks to Raj for organizing it. Thanks to the Ayn Rand Institute for supporting it. Thanks to Ashley for showing up and facing Yaron in this discussion. And I hope people got some value out of it and got some food for thought. And we're going to be back next week for more. And we're going to be here every Tuesday for some Tuesdays with Yaron facing a European intellectual. So many thanks to both. Many thanks to our viewers. All the best. Bye-bye.
Thanks, guys.